It's always a very scary day. Well, it certainly was for me after I graduated. Like, I did, in one hand, I was so keen to celebrate. I've got this piece of degree that I worked so hard for 5 years. But on the other hand, it was also really scary because I had no idea what I want to do. And now I need to become an overnight success to please the family, friends, and, get started on this corporate life journey. And it wasn't smooth sailing for me, and it wasn't what I expected at all. So I want to talk to John Pepper today and also Vince Pizzoni, our two special guest speakers, to talk about their life, because certainly they've got decades of experience, so they can share it with us about how their university, also university life, but also life after university turned out to be. Was it what they expected? And did they plan it? Like, is it possible to plan your postgrad life? Because I think that's $1 million question. A lot of final year university students and recent grads think about, and also scares them off as well. Like, do I need to have a career plan, 5-year plan, 10 years plan, 1-year plan? What's the plan? So I won't give any spoilers. I do know Vince from Nottingham, and also I've gone to him so many times to ask for career advice, and so he's a perfect person to talk about what recent grads can do today to prepare in this uncertain times, but also what are the things that we shouldn't worry about. And also John Pepper, who we've had some great experiences abroad doing volunteering projects in India and Africa, so he can talk about that as well. And for university students who are scared about not securing a job, John can talk about alternative options to gain experience as well. So actually, I would love to start the podcast first. Maybe we can go to you, John, first, just to give us a little bit of an introduction about your university life and what you did in your early careers.
Okay, well, early life. I mean, I was very, very lucky. Back in many years ago, I had a very good education. Went to a very nice school, and I was lucky enough to be sponsored through university.
Wow.
By BP. So prior to going to university, in actual fact, I got some basic engineering training at BP's Epsom Research Centre, where I learned some basic engineering practical skills. Mm-hmm. I went off to university and spent three marvelous years at university, and I'm not sure whether we didn't work as hard in those days. Maybe we didn't. But it didn't feel very much like desperately hard work. We had lectures in the mornings, and the afternoons were mostly off, except for one day a week, which was a practicals day. I think we did a Saturday morning as well.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, we did a Saturday morning. But one of the great things of being sponsored through university was that during the summer holidays, I got to travel with BP. One year travelled all the way to Hull, which was not really very much like travel, but it gave me an insight into working on a chemical factory, which was excellent. It was all on the practical engineering level, and I did question why I was studying academic engineering when the work that I was going to be involved in if I stayed with BP was going to be a completely different field.
Right.
But I think training basically and being able to think problems through logically doesn't matter whether it's an academic problem or whether it's a practical problem. I think that's something the university helped me with. My second summer vacation, I went out to the Middle East and worked for a company called ADMA, which was the Abu Dhabi Marine Areas, and I was given an chemical engineering project there to help disperse gases from a well test barge. So that actually was a brilliant little project. So my I came out of university. I must admit I didn't work too hard. I did what was necessary.
Wow.
Maybe in retrospect, I might have worked a little harder, but I didn't. I enjoyed myself. I rowed. I didn't do rowing. I was a cox. I rowed each summer, and I had a good time. I mean, and I think maybe it was. I think looking back, I mean, and now I work out in the Far East. I think people certainly out here are pushed too hard on the academics and don't have enough on the social and social skills side of things and interpersonal. And basically, life is not about work. Life is about a balance between everything. And so that was, that's my sort of beginning of my career. Or not,
Wow.
that hasn't really taken me into a career yet.
That sounds really interesting. So basically, BP sponsored you, gave you the opportunity. You went to university, and then after you finished university, you joined BP again.
I did. I didn't have to. They offered me. I mean, it was brilliant. I was offered 6 jobs by the company. I don't think that's the sort of thing that happens nowadays.
No.
And there was no obligation either, which was a great thing.
Are they still sponsoring? Do you know? Or is that a treasure from back in the days?
Actually, no. I slipped in through the back door actually, because it was actually the BP sponsorship program was very much a BP management perk. But I happened to know somebody. My sister actually worked for somebody in the university's engineering department, and he had some BP students. So I heard about this. So I went off and asked BP whether I could actually get onto a non-advertised course, which was sponsorship, and because effectively they needed to take occasional outsiders. I got onto the course. So,
I mean, that shows a long way to your proactiveness as well. So, I mean, you leverage your networks really well. So, and you reaped the rewards. So, good job on that.
Absolutely. I do remember my father saying. I said to my father before I went to university, I said, "Dad, would it be all right if I got sponsorship through university?" And he said, "Yeah, that would be all right."
Wow, that's good. Well, now, Vince, we would love to hear your early careers as well. I know yours is equally as interesting. It's making me realize maybe I was born in the wrong era. So, would love to hear about your university experience. How did you end up going to university and deciding what to study? And were you sponsored as well, or not really?
Mine's a different story, as you might imagine. So you have to go back to my parents. My parents were Italian.
Right.
My father was actually a prisoner of war here in England, and he went back to Italy, he married, and they decided to emigrate. And they had a family here in the UK. I was the firstborn. My parents, very influential in my life. They had no education. The only education they got was to age 11. So when I got to school beyond age 11, I was already knowing more than they'd ever studied. So that was quite a bit. You hear a lot today about I'm the first in the family to go to university. Well, I'm in the first in the family to get to beyond age 11 in school. So mine was a little bit different.
Wow.
I was brought up in Northamptonshire, and it turned out actually in those days we used to have something called the 11 plus. And I was very lucky because clearly I'd been given a brain, and I passed the 11 plus, and I went to my local state grammar school. And I think that's been another big factor in my life, because I was obviously able to study some of the things that definitely my parents never had. And I certainly found out that I was good at maths. So I knew I was good. I turned out to be good at maths. And I like the sciences, maths, chemistry, and physics. And I wasn't quite sure what to do at university. I was thinking maybe maths. But one of my friends said, "Oh, have you heard of chemical engineering?" I said, "No."
Mm.
And I said, "What is it?" He said, "I don't really know, but it says I've heard it's interesting." So that was my careers advice. My careers advice came from a friend
Yeah.
who was going to study the same subject. I went to see my chemistry teacher and I said, "I'm thinking of chemical engineering. What do you think?" He said, "Well, I don't know it, but sounds a good idea." So there you go. So you can look back on those days and think no careers advice, but I think probably still ended up doing what I was quite interested in. So I did well at school, and I put 5 universities down. I decided to choose Nottingham. The reason I chose Nottingham, I like the campus.
Mm.
Campus university. A lot of the trees have grown now. Not they hadn't 40 plus years ago. Actually, I worked out. It was 50 years ago. I was at Nottingham. Started in
Wow.
72. Do now.
No.
So in those days we were spoilt. We had 3 cooked meals a day. I
Wow.
was on full grant because obviously my parents didn't really have any money anyway, but I always got a lot of support from my family. They were very keen on us getting educated, which they didn't. I have to say I worked hard, but that's my work ethic, and that comes from my parents. Very strong work ethic. So I believed in putting the effort in, and I did do other things. I played for the university football team. You couldn't really do a lot of other things. Chemical engineering is quite a full-on degree, as you might imagine. But I had a summer internship in my 3rd year at ExxonMobil refinery at Fawley.
Mm-hmm.
And my story will end for the first part of my life in that I applied for a graduate job with them and I never got it.
Right.
But years later, I joined them, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But one little tip is never give in and never assume that if you've lost out on something, that's it, that's gone forever. It never is. So my story then moves on to Coventry and Courtaulds, which was my first job, where I spent several years, and that's when I started to travel. So we'll probably come on to that shortly in terms of my travel career, but that's my early career, childhood through to university, through to my first job with Coventry in Coventry with a textile company called Courtaulds, which doesn't exist today.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds really interesting, and it goes to show that what you study at university and like how you start, it comes a lot from your background. I mean, like John with his sister, and he managed to find, the sponsorship with BP, and for you, your parents, and you just met someone who thought chemical engineering was a good idea. And for me as well, like initially I wanted to study medicine, and then I didn't get in. So I sort of spoke to a few people, and they were like, people who don't get into medicine, they do chemical engineering. I was like, all right, that's what I will do. So it's good to see that. So it's not so much of a plan, but
No,
how it starts, but certainly where it goes and where you take it, it could be in your hands, but some things are in your control and some aren't. So maybe going back to John, after your experience at BP, so how long did you work for BP, and then what did you do afterwards? How was that journey for you?
Oh gosh, well, I was actually with BP for 20 years.
Wow.
So it was quite a long period. But then I worked in many of the different businesses within BP. I mean, I started off in the you remember I mentioned I worked at the Epsom Research Centre, which was BP Chemicals. Now I moved, when I first joined BP, I actually went to the Sunbury Research Centre, which was the main BP research centre. And I went there because it was at that stage I was doing engineering, general engineering. And it didn't make me have to choose too much which path to go down. And that was the thing that they sold to me, that I could spend some 2 or 3 years actually working out what I wanted to do. And in the first 2 to 3 years of my career with BP, I actually worked worked in designing and supervising the building of pilot plant. So we had pilot plant in microbiology, pilot plant in engine tests, and I got a very wide knowledge or very wide experience of everything from engine test beds through to microbiological processes. So it was actually a very, very good starting point in BP. But what I did find was that it was not the real, inverted commas, engineering world, and I was hankering for that. So I approached the engineering department in London. There seems to be a theme in my life. I push myself forward a little bit.
Yeah.
And I went to the engineering department and said I'd like to join the engineering department, and they accepted me into the main department. And my first real job with them was, I think, first real job with BP Engineering was to work on the Forties field back in the very, very early days of, we just commissioned the first platform, Forties Charlie, and I went on to the project and became part of the project on we were doing the NGL part of the project, and I joined the NGL team and helped with the construction and commissioning of two of the platforms, and I was based out of Aberdeen most of this time.
Wow.
So it was, we've gone from pilot plants and microbiology to
Full scale.
Full scale. And I certainly do remember being on Fortis Charlie when it was pumping oil at 500,000 barrels a day, and putting my hand on the export pipeline, and it was just throbbing and hot. And I thought, blimey, yeah, absolutely.
You won't be allowed to do that now, would you?
Oh no, the world is different. So different. Safety. This was prior to Piper Alpha.
Wow.
So safety. Yeah, safety. Whilst it was considered, it was not considered at the same level. I just turned up on the platform and they said, "Do you know where you're going?" I said, "Well, no, not really." "Well, just go down here, over there, and up there." And it was a world different. And if there'd been a disaster at that stage, it would have been very, very difficult. But I had a great time with that part of my engineering career, and then I stayed in the offshore field. I worked on the Buchan oil field in the North Sea, doing post startup modifications. So I was beginning to learn more about projects at this stage, and how projects were run. Where did I go then? Oh yes, I joined. I was planted into the Foster Wheeler offices in Reading. No, hang on. No, I wasn't. I went off to Sullom Voe next.
Right.
I worked on the construction and commissioning of the power station up there. So now we've gone to sort of power engineering from offshore engineering. So I've got had a wonderful variety of things that I've been involved in. So commissioning gas turbines and boilers, learning how to run commissioning teams, pre-commissioning teams, finding out what the difference was between pre-commissioning, commissioning, finding out about mechanical completion, finding out about handover to operator, all these sorts of things, finding out about paperwork. There's huge amounts of paperwork.
Did you have to draw PNID by hands back in the days?
Well, back in the day, absolutely, back in the day, you remember that. PNIDs, yes. PNIDs were hand marked up on site, and then they were sent off. PNIDs when I first was involved with them were all done on, black pen and erasers and things
I
like
don't know
that.
if it's nostalgia, but it sounds more fun to me. Probably wasn't fun when you had to draw 1,000 pipes and
Well,
measure it.
actually, I think it was actually there was more. What's the word? I think there was more satisfaction
Yeah.
in doing drawings by hand with black pen and on old-fashioned paper
Oh dear.
than CAD systems. But we're never
Yeah.
going to go back to those days.
No.
So I mean, there I was in Sullombo, going out fishing at midnight in the middle of the night, and one thing has always been a thing in my career, as best I can, is to try to have a balance in life, and that's something I would definitely stress to younger people coming out. Get some sport in, get some yoga, relaxation.
Not all of us are in Thailand, John, but okay.
Well, no, I mean, okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I know but I know I've deserved. I've earned this.
Yeah.
I've earned it. But I mean,
agree.
seriously, you can get too serious. You can get too serious about life.
Yeah.
I mean, I've certainly been in a situation in industry where people have got so stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in BP Chemicals, we used to make acetic acid, which is vinegar, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
And people would get so stressed about it. And I had younger people working with me. I said, guys, at the end of the day, it's vinegar, Just get it.
Makes sense.
Get it in perspective.
Yeah.
Don't do a good job, but don't.
Excellent. Well, that's certainly a good lesson to take away, pushing yourself forward to that next level in your careers and, having a good life balance. Vince, I would love to hear about your experience as well. So you mentioned, obviously, you did your internship with Exxon, you wanted to join the grad program, didn't work out. So how did you end up going back into Exxon again? Because I know a lot of grads, they really look up to these big names like BP, Exxon, or PepsiCo. Like the Fortune 500 companies are really looked up to. What did you do after your internship with Exxon, and how did you manage to get your foot back into the door again to join that? Was it a program, or did you just join for a full-time role?
Yeah, so actually what happened was I got a job in a textile company. I really enjoyed the job. It was for about I stayed there about 4 years. I got my chartership then. So I was still pretty technical in those days, but my career has veered off somewhat differently to John's. And the other thing that happened at Courtaulds was I had my first business trip overseas. And that was quite important because that's characterized my career. What I would say, I just made a note here. I think I've had 4 phases to my career. The early bit, which we've spoken about, and now I'm into the travel bit. So I'm going to talk about the travel bit.
Yeah.
So
where did you go?
I worked in Swaziland for 6 months in southern Africa, and that was a very interesting experience. Worked on a wood pulp mill in the operations side, and I had 2 visits to that place, and I had a great time, enjoyed it, and I actually got a chance to actually travel around South Africa, which was an extremely interesting place to visit in the 1970s and early 80s, because they still had apartheid then, and there's some very interesting experiences which we could go into at length if we needed to. But so I enjoyed the job, but what happened was that the textile company was suffering from cheap imports coming in from Asia, so I didn't see my career developing there. So I looked around and I saw a job with Procter & Gamble in Newcastle, and I went to work for Procter & Gamble for a couple of years. But although it's a great company, and I love the people I work with, it wasn't the right job for me. It was, at that time, it wasn't technical enough for me, because what I was working on was low temperature additives for detergents. So the most technical piece of equipment which I handled was a washing machine, which probably at that time felt not the most complex stuff that I'd be doing. And I saw a job come up with ExxonMobil, right, in Abingdon. They had a research centre in Abingdon. So this is 5 years after being rejected by ExxonMobil after my summer internship. I applied for a job, and I was interviewed there by several people, and I got it. And I think that is a lesson learned. The lesson learned is nothing is ever gone. And funny enough, people forget about the fact that they rejected you.
You remember though.
I don't keep the paperwork. Yeah, I remember, because my parents particularly were so disappointed when I didn't get into ExxonMobil. But anyway, I said, look, don't worry about it. Anyway, so I go and join ExxonMobil in Abingdon in the chemical division, and I was still technical, but I was starting to travel a lot because I was also involved in something called technical services, which is basically supporting our salespeople in the field, working on mainly oil refineries. I did have some work in oil and gas production. What we did was provided chemicals used to improve the efficiency and operation of both refineries and oil and gas production facilities. And I was traveling all over the place. So around Europe, and some of the Middle East. So I started to travel there. And then I made a big decision. I decided to get away from the technical, well, not totally, but I move into sales.
Wow.
And I never moved back into technical after that. So this was about, let's think, about 5, 8, 9, somewhere around 8 to 10 years after leaving university. I then moved to commercial. It was still a very technical role, but that was my first, probably I would say, major management role. So I managed a team in Europe who were based in different countries, and I was doing a lot of travel. Management was the first time I was exposed to that. All the people that reported to me were older than me, so that was an interesting experience. And I think the thing is, you will get leadership experience very early, potentially. A lot of the students, well, when they graduate, I wouldn't over worry it. We work with great people. All you do is treat at the end, you treat people like you would want to be treated. That's the main thing. So I had a lot of trips traveling around the UK and Europe, the rest of Europe, and I did that for a few years before I was given another opportunity, another promotion, and I was then based in Aberdeen. So I moved to Aberdeen and ran our North Sea business for a few years. This was just after I got married. So we moved up there. My wife's a dentist. She managed to get a job at the Royal Infirmary in Aberdeen. And we had a great 2 or 3 years there before I was moved again by ExxonMobil. They wanted me to move to Houston. And again, this is another little tip. So it was not the right time for my wife and I to move to Houston. They probably couldn't believe that I would turn a job down like that. They thought, you go. Everybody moved. But I actually went over there, and she would have had to have given up her job. And she wasn't going to do that. Absolutely 100% with her. So I said, I'm not going to move over, but I want the job. And that's what I did. For a year, I commuted to the States.
Wow.
So we were based in the UK. I commuted to the States. 1 month there, 1 month back in Europe, 1 month there. And even back in Europe, I wasn't just staying at home. I was traveling all around parts of the Middle East and Asia at that time anyway. So, that's another little tip. Sometimes you have to sacrifice things in your life to have certain things available. So I did this commuting for a year. I got to visit pretty well all of the states, all of the major oil fields, with the exception of Alaska, but I got everywhere else. Fantastic trips, great people, learned a lot.
Yeah.
And a year into that, I got a promotion back in the UK, and that was the first time I became a regional manager of a larger operation. and that's where the travel particularly took off. So we're probably going to go into that in more detail. But I mean, basically, I think I've been very fortunate. I've worked in 64 countries.
Wow.
I haven't spent time in some of them, but I've got a pretty good idea of the culture of pretty well everywhere in the world, Roxana, except South America. I've been. So
What did that traveling do for you? Like, what was the like thing that you took from that traveling, which you think you might not have had you not traveled around so much?
I reckon I've learnt a lot. I think I've learnt a lot about the different people, cultures, and that's actually helped me in my future career then, which was coaching. That's definitely helped me, because I now meet people, and I've probably been to their country, and I know we can talk about it. You know, I had a student, I was in Nottingham yesterday. I had a student from Nigeria. I could easily chat away about my experiences in Nigeria with him before we even got into coaching. So
remember, you told me once you've been to Iran as well, right?
I've been to Iran several times.
That's crazy.
And
wow.
I enjoyed my trips there. I pretty well enjoyed everywhere I've been, actually.
Yeah.
But I think it's taught me about cultures. It's taught me about a little bit about the lives that people have. It's also taught me how business is done in different countries, which can be very different. So I think I've learned a lot from that. And I have to be thankful to ExxonMobil, because I spent 15 plus years then, and then I ended up going into a joint venture with another company called Nalco, and I still retain that close contact with ExxonMobil, and I think they provided some of the best training I've ever had in my life, and some of the best experiences. So I can only speak positive things about them. But that's probably the second phase of my career, which is the travel part, which is so pretty well then until about the early 2000s, I was on the road a lot. And we have this big joke, my wife and I, been married 37 years, 26 years we've been apart. And again, maybe that's why we're still together.
Maybe that's the secret to a successful marriage.
A lot of people would not put up with that. A lot of people I know wouldn't put up with that, but with us it worked, because we discussed everything before we talked about it, and before I actually did it. So, you know, sometimes in life you do have to make sacrifices, and maybe that's something that people need to learn a little bit about as their career develops.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's very really interesting, and I'm quite jealous, because I feel like I'm so many countries behind to get to that 64. So maybe going back to John, like I would love to hear about, when did you leave BP, and then what did you do after you left BP? So life after BP.
Okay, well, I'll just briefly tell you about before I left. I mean, having spent time up in Shetland, because I just want to pick up on a couple of things that Vince said.
Yeah.
One was then I then travelled with BP, but I spent longer times in the countries.
Right.
I spent 3 years in Holland, and I spent 3 years in France. I had a hardship posting on the south coast of France at the refinery down there. But what I really did find is to see the different cultures, the way in which the Dutch do business and engineering, and the way in which the Meridional French do business and engineering. They are so absolutely, completely different.
How is it different?
The Dutch are very rigid. They're nearly Teutonic and nearly Germanic in the way that they do things. If they come up with a solution, they don't like to consider other solutions, even though if they're in a feasibility stage of a project, they see a solution, they like to go with it. The French, working with the Southern French, they had a complete flair for engineering. They just loved doing things, and it was their challenge to them to do things in the best way possible for the minimum cost. And we used to entertain Northern European colleagues, and they couldn't believe what we could do in the south of France for the same money, because we would challenge everything. The French, the Southern French would, and I think it's a French characteristic anyway, would challenge all the way about why were we doing it this way, why were we doing it that way.
Mm.
So certainly, as an engineer, as a piece of advice to a younger technical person, yes, of course you've got rules, you've got codes of practice, you've got your BSs, you've got your ENs, you've got all these things, but they're mostly written as guidelines. Not some of course are you haven't got any choice. But I would suggest that one of the main things to do is challenge, not to the extent that you're a complete pain in the butt, but there are many ways of doing a job, and so that's one major thing that I learned by traveling and working in different cultures. Now, having spent a wonderful time overseas, I then came back to Earth with a thump and went to BP Chemicals in Humberside, and that was a very interesting time, actually, a time of expansion, a time of renovation. Some of my best experiences in BP Chemicals, and that was a time at which I really found that you need to rely on other people. That people you can get at you as an engineer with your master's degree and you experience this, that, and the other. Sometimes I felt that I could, and coming from a privileged background, you can sometimes forget that people with whom you work know more about what they do than you do.
Mm.
And even though you think you know everything, you don't. And to recognize the fact that people whom you might think have got too much to offer you in your professional career have maybe got a lot more to offer you than you might think. Always ask people who've been operating a plant, operating a system, operating a process about how it works, and ask them how would they change things rather than try to do it from a purely technical point of view. Yeah. And another thing that Vince has mentioned, which I would also pick up on, I never really learned too much about the business I was involved in. I was very technical, running projects and such like. It is paramount and really important to understand the business that you work in, because then I think sometimes engineering decisions that you think you're making the right engineering decision, from a business perspective, it might not be the right thing to do. And if you understand your business, you might come up with a different engineering solution. So understand your business. So you asked me about what happened to me after BP. Well, at that time in the 80s, was it? Maybe early 80s, BP was actually offering early retirements, and I was lucky enough to get a very, very handsome early retirement package from BP, and I went on to become a school teacher for 3 years. I thought it was something I wanted to do. It was something I wanted to do, but it took me 3 years of working as a school teacher in the secondary education sector in Scotland. But it was I felt that I could bring a lot to some of the younger people from having a knowledge of what the world is like outside education. But a friend of mine actually enticed me back into well, what did I do? No, actually, I left. No, I was offered a role back in engineering as a business development manager by a previous colleague, and I was getting a little bit jaded by crowd control, as we were calling it in those days, in teaching, and I must admit, the going back to playing with engineering toys on a large scale was more than I could resist. So I went back into engineering as a business, but more on the business side, for a smaller process engineering company.
That's really interesting. Seems like both you and Vince had your technical phase of the career, but also were able to transition to more business/commercial roles, I think it's a bit of a challenge nowadays for a lot of grads. It's like if you enroll into a graduate program, it's reasonably easy because they kind of rotate you around different roles, different departments. But if you enter a role and it's really technical, I feel like there's a lot of push towards training as a technical person or training as a commercial person. Vince, for you, like how did you decide to like pivot into business development? You mentioned you did sales. So what was that sales role and how long did you do that for?
So I had a sales role, which was the Aberdeen one. And then I got this US position, which ended up being commuting, which was a global marketing role. So I'd worked in technical, I'd worked in operations, I'd worked in sales, marketing, and eventually my career took me to general management, which is where perhaps a lot of students will end up. So actually I was managing big regions with lots of people. And my last big job before I left industry and then had some career changes was I was general manager for our Europe, Africa, Middle East, Russia, former Soviet Union operation. So I had 50 countries,
Wow.
several hundreds of people, and quite a big business. That business today, it was about a third of the company's business, roughly. I was part of a company then called Nalco, and we had big operations in the US, Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia, and South America. And I was managing one of those regions. And a great job, a lot of pressure, a lot of travel. I was on the road even more. Fortunate to get an award as well, which actually my wife and I, we got a fully paid trip to Puerto Rico, paid by the company. So that was nice for a week. But then I thought it's probably not going to last a lot longer than that. And within 2 years, I was out of the company. So I was the most senior person in Europe. I was probably costing them too much. And I was out of the company. But to be honest, it was not a negative at all. I think a lot depends on this is probably another tip, I suppose, is see the positive in everything, right? My greatest ever manager, who was at Exxon, who I still keep in touch with, he retired well before me, always talked about, Vince, two people in this world, two types of people, one that see problems to every solution and ones that see solutions to every problem. Make sure you're in the latter. And I would 100% agree with that. Positive, optimistic, always believe there is a solution to something, not, hanging around about all the negatives about, oh, I've got problem here and problem there. So consequently, I don't like moaners, right? So I'm anti-moaner.
Yeah.
Particularly when I only have to think back to what my parents suffered, and and I think I've got nothing in comparison. Most people don't have. Anyway, I got to this very senior role, and then I was out. I decided I took a package as well, and this is my third phase of my career, which evolves into my fourth phase, which is I had career change, and funnily enough, one of those that was one of the most significant was I went to work in a school.
Oh wow! Was it the same school as John, perhaps?
Yeah, no, not the same school. I saw a job advertised for head of professional guidance at Cheltenham Ladies College, and I applied for it, and I got to the shortlist, and I was the only male in the shortlist, and the only one from a business career, and they chose me.
Okay.
And I think in that situation, being different was a plus. It often is, perhaps. So my career went from, and in fact, at that stage, to be honest, and maybe John felt the same, I could go from a salary that was here to a salary that was there and not worry about it. So, and that's effect. I mean, it wasn't about money. It was about doing so. So actually, in that job was fantastic. So for 4 years, I was at Cheltenham Ladies. I was head of professional guidance, which is basically head of careers. I had a team, and I spent all my days coaching the students. And actually, that was another thing that I'd learned from my business career. Much as I loved leading teams and achieving success, what I really liked was coaching my team. coaching and mentoring. And that was something that took off at Cheltenham, and then that took off even further when I went into my portfolio career afterwards. So I ended up working in, I stayed there for 4 years. I then moved to executive search, which took me back to industry. Funnily enough, John's, experience has some similarity. So I went back to energy sector executive search based in London. I did that for a few years before I moved to portfolio. And my life since the school has been about coaching and mentoring.
Wow.
Well,
Yes. That sounds very interesting. How did you end up in coaching and mentoring? Like, why did you think how did you come across that, and why did you think that's something you would enjoy? Because it's not is it a natural step? I don't know. You both went into teaching, so is this a typical step or route to take?
It's I don't know about typical, but it for me it was a natural transition, because the reality was I'd got 40 plus years of experience.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give it to the future generations.
Mhm.
And that was one way of doing it. And in fact, so that's what I do now. I coach, I do lots of things, as you know. Part of it is university, coaching students there for jobs and placements. And part of that is working with business school, MBA students. And I do privately. So
Wow.
frankly, my career has gone from leading teams across multiple countries and business to how can I give all that experience to the younger generations. And actually, I found it a natural transition personally.
Yeah.
I've done a few training courses and things, but the reality is what the students get is my business career. That's what they get. 40, and today it's 46 years, which is not bad, is it?
No. Amazing. Yeah. It's a
Most,
lifetime. Yeah.
most people will have long gone by then. I know that, but I'm going to keep going as long as I can.
Wow. No, that's amazing. That sounds like a very enriching journey, especially with all those countries you've been to. And same for you, John, as well. You did teaching, and then you went back to industry again, right, John? And
Yes,
then did you go back
indeed.
into teaching again? So what happened after you went back to industry?
Well, I forgot to mention I also did executive search
Wow.
for a time. Seems like we're paralleling ourselves a little bit on some of this. So yeah, I went back into industry. I went to Aberdeen, oil industry, business development for 3 separate companies, working part-time most of the time, day rating. So I was able to. So I wasn't part of the establishment too much. I used to day rate, which was great. And it was around about this time as well. I was coming up to 60. I had no intention of retiring, and I was getting my wife was working with a charity, and I was moaning a little bit about the company I was working with, and she says, "Well, why don't you go and there's an opportunity in Africa to go and run a project for children in Africa. Why don't you go and do that and stop moaning?" Because Vince would have kicked me out there a long time before, because I was being micromanaged by somebody, and I used to mutter a lot. So anyway, I did. The next thing I know is that I woke up one morning in the middle of Africa, in a room with
in Cameroon.
Place.
Yeah.
In Cameroon.
Yeah.
And I was being attacked by mice and
Oh my God.
and termites.
Wow.
And lying there on my bed, I thought, what the hell am I doing now? What? I'm going back to the airport. I should be here. But no, and then that set me off on my third sector NGO type ventures. Part of which was to take volunteers to overseas environments, to show them different places and different things, which is a little bit like mentoring. Zara, when I had your team in Africa and in Nagaland,
Yeah.
it's just brilliant.
Yeah, it
Um,
was. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I mean, what younger people were learning, I think you were all learning. I mean, we're all learning, but I mean, it was just a different world,
Yeah.
and it gives you a great appreciation of, you know,
Yeah.
the privilege we have of living in the West, in very difficult times in UK.
Yeah.
But so that's when I moved. I moved after I was paralleling some of my time with charity work, engineering work, business development work. Still working in the North Sea and things. But and I moved on from that, and I'm still working in the charity sector. I have absolutely no intention of retiring, because I don't want to. And I'm now in Thailand, working here. I teach children whilst I'm here, English, because it's a very great sought after skill. Fluent English, native English speakers, to help children here. And I'm still working in Nagaland, Nepal, and in Africa. And so will it continue until such time as I drop dead, probably. But, you know,
yeah, I
so
think
that's
when you love what you're doing, it's a bit different, isn't it? Like, I think you think about retiring when you're tired of what you're doing and you just don't want to continue doing that. But you seem to love what you're doing. So
well,
why
the
would
thing
you
is,
stop?
why would you stop? I mean,
Yeah.
no. I mean, and it's fascinating. I mean, I have thought about trying to do some sort of mentoring, life skills coaching, because I've had a successful, relatively successful career, and I'm also in retirement, and still actively involved in doing what I consider good stuff for the world,
Yeah.
and being able to demonstrate that to other people who may feel that they've come to the age of 65 and that's it. Well, I'm way beyond 65 now, it gets me up in the morning, keeps me going, and if I can help other people to see that, maybe I want to should be mentoring older people into the fact that they're not a scrap heap when they actually come to the retirement age.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you the two projects that we did with you totally changed the direction of all the volunteers' life. Like Andreas, for example, one of the volunteers with us before that, he wanted to go into oil and gas, but when he came to first he went to Cameroon, and then he came on board with us, and it changed his career path completely, and he decided to go down the renewable energy sector, and he started traveling, and he actually went on to do multiple other projects with Engineers Without Borders Global after that as well. So and I remember when I wanted to organize these projects with John, and that's how we met initially. I joined Engineers Without Borders Society, and then I was looking for a charity to partner up with to do some sort of volunteering projects. And then I met John on LinkedIn, and then he came down to Nottingham, did a presentation for students, and everyone loved it, and they loved him. So we thought, wow, this is going to be amazing. So I remember I was pitching for grants, and everyone was like, why are you thinking about going to Africa? We have problems next door in Nottingham. But the difference was when we went to Cameroon, the whole thing was a lesson. From the moment we were in the airport to the day we landed back into the UK, the whole journey, we learned so much from just how do you organize a travel to a third world country. That's on itself is a lesson, because there were so many political things, and I remember our cars used to get stopped in the middle of the road by random people, and we had to give them money to let us go. So it was an adventure, and it was an adventure that really changed the direction of many of our lives. I know we are up to our hour, but I'm hoping you guys have a couple minutes to spare to kind of wrap up Vince's journey, and just wrap up. But if not, I completely understand as well.
We're fine.
No,
Okay.
carry on.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, I mean, would love to go back to you, Vince. You're coaching, and now you're at Nottingham as well. Back to Nottingham, coaching and helping. So, what are you currently doing, and where do you see the next phase of your career moving towards? You mentioned you have a portfolio business as well. Is that in the coaching?
Yes, so I'm on lots of boards, which again I see as important, and they are boards that generally support everything that I believe in. So, for example, not in order of importance, Women in Engineering Society. I'm on the board of the Women in Engineering Society because I believe in diversity and inclusion in engineering. So I'm the only male engineer on the board, which is interesting. Very often it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Not many females working in the very male dominated. I've got the opposite, which is fine with me. I had the same situation at Cheltenham Ladies, so that was not a problem. So I do quite a lot of work for the Women's Engineering Society. I've actually given quite a few talks. I've got one coming up at Amazon. Going to talk to Amazon about why 96% of their engineers in Europe are all male. They've only got 4% female, so we're probably going to try and do something about that.
Yeah.
And various visits. I'm going up to BAE Systems next month to talk about reverse mentoring, which is quite an interesting topic. So I get lots of stuff there. I'm also on the board of something called My Big Career, which works to provide career guidance to students from disadvantaged backgrounds. So again, this is something I believe very strongly in, the education and career guidance. And at Cheltenham, we had the girls had infinite support. You go to some of these schools, I can tell you, well, you would know. I mean, some of these schools, the only career guidance they get is probably an hour a week of the head of music, who's got a bit of free time to do that. It's chalk and cheese. So we go in and support schools. We're primarily focused at the moment in London and the Northeast, but that will expand. So we do lots of work there. I'm also on vice chair of a school trust, which in Shropshire here, which covers a bunch of primary schools and secondary schools. So I get involved. That's another piece of my educational thing, again, which I believe in. And then I'm also involved with an outfit called Focus, which is all about supporting expatriates coming to the UK and their spouses, which again, I've got a lot of empathy with, having spent a lot of my career traveling around anyway. So I've got all that, plus the university, plus business school. So I work with, I don't know, London Business School, Imperial, Cambridge, Oxford, and a few others.
Wow.
You
have a lot of free time then.
Yeah, not much free time. I just seem to add stuff. But I mean, I enjoy what I do, and in fact, most of my coaching is energy focused. It's about the energy transition. A lot of it is helping students and MBA postgraduates and up to executive. I work with executive and board people in terms of a career change. And again, having had a career, I think I can probably help in that way. So that's probably that is the current phase of my life, Roxana. And I think, that's going to be like that, I suspect, for a while. I just keep adding stuff on. And then one day, like John, I'm probably going to wake up and I'm going to say, you know what? There's nothing new I can bring. I think today I can still bring lots new. I'm going to wake up, perhaps say, there's nothing new I can bring. It's the same old conversations. Maybe it's time to stop. But to be honest, I think there's a long way to go before then. I hope.
Yeah.
And like John, I think the only way I'm going to stop is if they carry me out.
I think a lot of what you both share is a lot of core fundamental truths to it. So even if you keep repeating the same thing, young people, they say some of them, especially nowadays, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but we hear something today, we might not remember tomorrow. So we need it said multiple times, and then finally one day we wake up and say, okay, yeah, John was right, or Vince was right. Maybe I should travel a little bit more and learn about different cultures, or maybe I should challenge different viewpoints of people and be a bit more curious to learn more. So you don't necessarily have to invent something new for it to be valuable.
No.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and the question that I like to always end the podcast with is, if you could have one call to action for a person who's early in their careers, let's say this person has had a miracle and they're willing to take any advice you would give them. What would you say one thing they could do from today to help them with their career? Like, if they could do one thing, what would that be? Maybe John, if you have an answer ready, you can go first, or what?
Oh, well, I think the most important thing to remember is that you work with people, and if you rely on other people and not to be worried about whether they might come up with an idea that you hadn't come up with. So work with people, rely on other people, and never have a fear about whether somebody's better than you, and just work with them, and come up with solutions, such like together, as opposed to fighting to get to the top of some silly pile. You'll get a much more satisfying job and life by working, going along that sort of route.
Yeah, no, definitely, that's very valuable. Thank you. Vince?
I'd agree about people matter, but I guess if I'm going to pick one, and you probably know what I'm going to pick, it's network. Absolutely key to everyone's career is their ability to network with people, because the reality is, as their career develops, opportunities come through those people, not so much necessarily advertised in the a paper or online or whatever. It's actually about the relationships you develop with people, and they can do no worse than develop their network from university going forward. I think for me that's the key, and the more and more I talk to people, the more and more I know that's true. So I think network.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, both. That's been a very valuable conversation. If people want to get in touch with you, are you open to people reaching out on LinkedIn, or what's the best way if people want to reach out?
For me, LinkedIn's fine. Yeah, they could reach out. I use LinkedIn all the time, so that's fine with me.
Yeah, LinkedIn, absolutely. And I mean, if people are interested in taking their volunteering somewhere, I'm looking at new models of volunteering, and I'm certainly interested to hear from people who might be interested in volunteering in technical and in other areas. So yeah, LinkedIn is fine by me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, both. It's been a really valuable conversation. I feel like the hour has gone by so quick. So really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes.